Oh boy, Dalkaen here, and this is my 2016 video game retrospective. I'm going to be briefly discussing each and every game I finished this year. For 2014 and 2015, these were blog entries, and in both of those years I finished 35 games. For some, this is a lot of games, and for others, not so much. Considering how many long-winded RPGs I play, I think it tends to be quite a lot. This year, however, I finished 44 games. Take that with a grain of salt, though, because I played a lot of indie games this year and no fewer than 13 Mega Man titles. Still, I found room for long RPGs here and there. Without further ado, here's the list. Trails in the Sky Second Chapter was the first game I finished in 2016, but of course the majority of its 70-odd hour playtime came from 2015. I also played on Vita as a download from the PlayStation Network, which means I had no means of recording it. This was also before I finally started to get serious about recording my gameplay, but more on that later. Finishing Second Chapter really dialed me into Falcom's long-running series. I became invested in the world they built, which becomes evident in later entries on this list. I originally decided to play Mega Man 9 because Shovel Knight put me in the mood for retro platformers. I'd never managed to finish Mega Man 9 before, so I decided to give it another shot. Shovel Knight did not prepare me for this game's intense difficulty. I think I probably spent more than 8 hours of playtime just trying to make my way through the game. Even after playing an absolute ton of Mega Man this year, I have my suspicions that the 9th entry is the hardest of the lot. Even Splash Woman took me many tries, and so many platforming segments took a significant amount of trial and error, not unlike the very first game of the series. Fortunately, Mega Man 10 cut down the difficulty a tad, and even added the ability to play as Proto Man. Additionally, most of the weapons are really cool and interesting. I really enjoyed both of Inti Create's retro reboots, and I'd love to play more of them, but admittedly they're pretty busy cranking out other games these days. It was at this point that I finally got the idea in my head to start recording games I was playing and producing content on them. My first ever review video was pretty rough, but it started a trend that I'm actually kind of proud of. As for the game, Mega Man Zero punched me in the gut with its difficulty, even after playing Mega Man 9 and 10. I wasn't quite prepared for it because the gameplay was much more similar to the Mega Man X series in style. I feel I should mention at this point that the Mega Man Zero series was developed by Inti Creates, the same developer behind Mega Man 9 and 10, and a whole slew of other Mega Man related titles. Mega Man Zero 2 builds on the gameplay of its predecessor, but eliminates the tedious grinding from the first game. The difficulty is a notch lower as well, but you're rewarded for playing well by acquiring EX skills from bosses defeated while at a high rank. How I had time to beat these games so quickly and produce videos on them is anyone's guess, but I'd wager it had something to do with being unemployed. Mega Man Zero 3 iterates on the Cyber Elf upgrade system by allowing you to carry one around with you permanently without penalizing your rank. Additionally, Zero can be upgraded with a variety of different chips. The final game of the Mega Man Zero series changes things up a bit by doing away with the traditional Cyber Elf system and replacing it with a single Cyber Elf that levels up as you progress. Weather effects and the ability to nab enemy weapons with the Zero Knuckle are also notable changes. Forced to choose, the third game is my favorite, but all of them are worth playing. Confronted with the fact that I'd finished the Mega Man Zero series, I decided to backtrack and pick up where I left off with Mega Man X. I really enjoyed the first game in the series, but the jump to PlayStation I'm less excited about. The controls seem much clunkier, and the game in general is frustrating to play. The actual mechanics are sound, but I was eager to be done with it, and based on what I've heard, the series doesn't get better from there. Although Fire Emblem Awakening was not my favorite Fire Emblem title, the gameplay was enough to make me greatly anticipate Fire Emblem Fates. I was pretty excited at the concept of playing as two opposing factions across different games, but unfortunately the plot and characters were not exactly up to snuff. The gameplay is as solid as ever, and perhaps the most refined it's ever been, but it's disappointing how thin the plot was. Birthright covers the Eastern-themed kingdom of Hoshido. I have a love-hate relationship with the Tales series. I generally dig the combat system of these games, but it seems so frequently that that's about all I enjoy. Xillia 2's combat system might actually be an improvement upon its predecessor, but it almost entirely reuses environments from that game. On the bright side, it features a huge cast of playable characters, none of which are all that interesting, unfortunately. Characters like Mila and Rowan continue to be insufferable, but Xillia 2 really ups the ante by featuring the tremendously unlikable Muse as a playable character. At least there are a lot of different playstyles to experiment with. Conquest, which concerns the Western-themed Kingdom of Nor, is much more difficult than Birthright and features a lot more gimmicks in its missions. Sometimes this is pretty satisfying because it adds an extra layer of strategy. In other cases, it's needlessly frustrating. I can recall one mission in particular where you're tasked with breaking vases that impart various stat bonuses or poison your party members. The map is absolutely filled with these things, and it's absurdly annoying. Okay, this game is super weird. As could be expected, I heard about it thanks to the Game Grumps, but what motivated me to actually play through and finish it, I may never know. The Dog Island is an adventure game about a bunch of big-headed dogs, one of which you control. You'll run around and sniff things, bark at snakes, and solve puzzles while exploring the island. Your goal is to save your sick sister and become a master sniffer. Yeah, it's crazy. Revelation strikes me as essentially the fanfiction version of Fire Emblem Fates. What if both sides put aside their differences and work together to defeat the true evil? In Revelation, both Hoshido and Nor inexplicably and bloodlessly align to vanquish the Dark Dragon. The gameplay is, as usual, really solid, and having such a massive cast of characters with which to assemble your party is really cool, but again, the plot is such garbage. Awakening has the same problem to an extent, but despite a unique and interesting premise, controlling opposing sides of an army, Fire Emblem Fates falls flat in its execution. Most characters are tremendously flat and uninteresting, and the marriage/offspring mechanic is incredibly shoehorned in to be consistent with mechanics introduced in Awakening. When you pair off characters, they tend to have a child which can be recruited into your army, after they've spent years in a deep realm where time flows differently. Why these deep realms exist, or what relevance they have to the plot overall, is anyone's guess, of course. Awakening didn't handle this in the best way either, but it was at least handled a little more gracefully. Falcom requested that Xseed skip localizing the Crossbell duology immediately following Trails in the Sky, in favor of localizing the Cold Steel trilogy, so it's quite a jump forward in terms of presentation. The gameplay is a bit more advanced too, although some criticize the decrease in difficulty, not least of all because it's so much easier to break the game's mechanics, which is only worsened in Cold Steel 2, interestingly. Cold Steel's definitely a bit shinier than Trails in the Sky, but I tend to prefer Sky's characters. Even so, I really enjoyed it and was eager to play the sequel after a terrible cliffhanger. Level 5's Yokai Watch is tremendously popular in Japan, and I can see why. It has a ton of polish, and the combat system is fresh and a lot of fun. The designs echo traditional Japanese folklore, and for that reason resonate with Japanese people quite a bit more than a Western audience. The designs are significantly more whimsical than Pokemon, and sometimes don't really work for me. Even so, the combat wheel mechanic is really fun, and I enjoyed the game for the most part. It still hasn't necessarily convinced me to buy Yokai Watch 2, however. I first played Bravely Default when it came out, but since I played it on the heels of Final Fantasy The Four Heroes of Light, I was a little burned out on the formula, even if Bravely Default made some pretty significant changes. After a 2-year gestation period, I returned, determined to clear out my backlog. The game is definitely still a mixed bag though. While the combat and class system is solid, the characters don't do anything for me, and the latter half of the game is absolutely atrocious. Transistor's art direction and sense of style are really fantastic, much like Supergiant's previous title, Bastion. Although the game's definitely on the short side at about 7 hours, its unique gameplay and atmosphere make it an extremely memorable title. Dust is an independent hack-and-slash action RPG originally released for 360 on the Xbox Live Marketplace. I picked it up on Steam out of curiosity and really enjoyed it despite some amateurish artwork on some of the game's anthropomorphic animal characters. The combat is really solid and the plot and characters aren't too bad either. For a while I was really on an indie game kick, and the first Momodora title is about as indie as they come. It takes about an hour to finish and seems like straight-up cave story worship with its variety of Polar Star-esque weapons. It's really a hodgepodge of ideas, and despite the short length, is very difficult. Momodora 2, on the other hand, takes us straight into Metroidvania territory with a much heavier emphasis on exploration. Although it's still a short game, it's much more thematically cohesive and fun to play, with the guns from the first game replaced with hurled cards, although the protagonist's leaf blade is retained. Momodora 3 sadly returns to a level-based format, but executes them much more effectively than the first game. Despite the format, this is my favorite of that initial trilogy. I would go on to play the fourth game of the series much later in 2016, near the end of December. Because I was desperate to find good, exclusive titles for the Vita, I purchased Tales of Hearts R, Persona 4 Golden, and Muramasa Rebirth. I finished Muramasa in 2015, and will finish Persona 4 in 2017, but Tales of Hearts R I finished in 2016. The Tales series is inconsistent at best, and Hearts R is not an exemplary game, but it's honestly a bit more fun than I was expecting. The combat system is definitely better than some games in the series, and the characters aren't absolutely awful, but I still can't say I'd definitely recommend it. I started The World Ends With You in 2008 and finished it in 2016. Sure, the combat system is innovative, the visual style is impressive, and the music is memorable. Whether or not it's actually fun to play is up for debate, but I'm going to throw my opinion into the hat and say it's not very fun. I feel like I'm mashing buttons more often than not, and never feel like I'm truly on top of the strategy. Keeping track of both screens at once is interesting in theory, but in practice it's stressful and unsatisfying. I found myself picking pens that required very little input on my part in an effort to power through the game. Can't recommend it despite the novelty. Tokyo Mirage Sessions is an incredible JRPG, emphasis on the J in this case, that mashes up elements of the Fire Emblem series and Shin Megami Tensei, particularly Persona, and almost nobody played it because it was on the dying Wii U. For me, it's one of the few reasons you might want to own the console, although there are still several games I need to try to feel more validated in my purchase, particularly Xenoblade Chronicles. Anyway, this game is a strong contender for my absolute favorite of the year. It was at this point of the year that I decided to finally tackle the East series, after having planned to do so for a very long time. I was of course determined to document and review the games as I went, and I've kept that up so far. Ancient East Vanish debuts the infamous bump system in which Adol hurls himself into foes in order to damage them. It's a bit more intuitive than it sounds, but it does take some getting used to, particularly since you have to position yourself just right in order to prevent taking damage. The sequel, which takes place directly after the first game, is quite a bit better. The bump system is a bit more forgiving, and Adol gains the ability to use fire magic, which actually leads to some pretty fun boss fights. Both games also have excellent soundtracks. I Am Setsuna was heavily hyped as a successor to Chrono Trigger, and it fails spectacularly to live up to those lofty expectations. It's a pretty game with a plaintive, although not very memorable, piano soundtrack with lots of repeated enemies and backgrounds spread out over 20 hours of gameplay. The combat system is excellent, but the game is so easy the breadth of mechanics seems wasted. Not an awful game, but its hype certainly did it no favors. After playing East Chronicles, I decided to move directly onto the third game of the series. I knew there was a massively updated remake available, but I wanted to play the original to get some context. It was an interesting experience, and I enjoyed having the opportunity to compare the games, but boy was Wanderers an absolute chore to play, with its awful hit detection, poor graphics, and miserable boss encounters. Luckily, the remake is excellent and improves on Wanderers in just about every single way. Humdrum boss encounters are transformed into thrilling challenges. The fiendish difficulty is still there, but it feels much more fair, like it was actually designed that way. When I finished this game, I filmed myself talking about it. To date, it's the only time my face has actually shown up in one of these videos. I originally planned to do more, but lost confidence. We'll see if that trend continues in 2017. What I discussed in that video still applies now. Lathrasir is a very pretty 2D action RPG with good mechanics, but repetition does it in, and soured the experience somewhat for me. Ys Origin more or less features the same gameplay as the Oath and Felghana, but looks just a little bit nicer. It lacks a little variety in environments compared to Felghana, but has 3 playable characters with different gameplay patterns. Better than Felghana in some ways, and worse in others, it serves as a good companion piece. It was at this point that I slowed way down on completing games. It took over a month to finish Cold Steel 2, mostly because the game is like 80 hours long, but also because lots of sales happened sometime after that, and I started playing 1,000 games at once. Regardless, I loved Cold Steel 2 in all its kitschy glory. It's got giant robots, talking cats, betrayal, intrigue, airships, superpowers. It has a ton of playable characters, a great soundtrack, and an interesting plot. I'm really looking forward to the third game. I'm so much more invested in Trails than I was at the beginning of this year. Literally 2 months later, I picked up the Mega Man Legacy Collection and subsequently beat the first Mega Man title. Meanwhile, I'm playing a dozen other games, some of which I finished this year, but a lot of which I'll be playing well into 2017. Playing Mega Man this late in the year is like coming full circle since I played so many of them at the beginning. Mega Man is just about as hard as I remember, although the Yellow Devil wasn't quite as fearsome an opponent this time around. So many Final Fantasy fans waited so long for this title, and when it finally did release, it ended up being a bit of a mixed bag. The game is a mess in a lot of ways, even if overall I enjoy it. The plot is filled with holes, and lots of important plot points occur entirely off-screen. The action combat is fun and fairly intuitive, and there are many set pieces that are very impressive to behold. Additionally, the relationship between the bros is really fun, but there are just a myriad of issues that drag the experience down. Evidently, there are patches on the way to resolve some of the story issues, but I have to wonder how it released this way in the first place. I spent about 55 hours on this game, but I could have easily finished it a lot sooner if I'd skipped some of the game's many mundane side quests. Still, with only 21 days left in the year, I'm not sure how I finished 10 more games after this. Ah, indies, of course! This game is as indie and low budget as they get, but even so, I absolutely loved it. Zeboyd Games pay homage to classic JRPGs as well as zombie and horror tropes with the post-apocalyptic Breath of Death 7, where you'll field a party consisting of a skeleton protagonist, a ghost magician, a vampire techie, I couldn't help but think of Luca from Chrono Trigger, and a dull zombie brawler. Each of the characters learn a unique set of skills, but the twist is that you have 2 choices each time they level on which skills or stats they acquire. Simple, short, and quite good. Cthulhu Saves the World is essentially a companion piece. Just like Breath of Death, I wasn't really expecting much when I started playing this game, but I ended up enjoying it a lot. The branching level-up system continues to add to the strategy and customization, but Cthulhu kicks it up a notch by offering a variety of different playable characters. The graphical fidelity has increased somewhat from its predecessor, but of course it's still very lo-fi and retro. Still a very enjoyable, if short, RPG. I played the majority of World of Final Fantasy before Final Fantasy XV came out, but unfortunately did not finish it. As a result, I took a break from it to play through Final Fantasy XV in its entirety before coming back to finish this one. In retrospect, I'm not sure which of these games I enjoyed more. FF15 is certainly broader in scope, but it feels unfinished and unpolished in some ways, despite plenty of excellent traits. World of Final Fantasy is a bit more cohesive as an experience, even if it's not quite as ambitious. The turn-based combat is as classic as it gets, but the monster stacking mechanic is quirky and fun. All the callbacks to classic Final Fantasy characters and monsters is a real treat to a longtime fan like myself, but I'll admit that it would have been nice to see those characters rendered in a less simplistic art style. Helen's Mysterious Castle is a really cool little indie RPG made in a program similar to RPG Maker called RPG School. As far as I know, it's Japan only, but fortunately the game itself received an English localization. It's surprisingly long for the kind of game it is, coming in at 6 to 7 hours of gameplay, but the dialogue and characters are cute and the battle system is really satisfying and unique. It essentially boils down to strategically attacking and blocking while paying close attention to the wait time of your weapons and of your opponent. A really unexpected jump. Hey, I completed this one on my birthday! Momodora takes the best elements of Momodora 2 and 3 and combines them into one package while simultaneously upgrading the graphical fidelity. The sprites are larger and more detailed and the animation's more fluid. This is still definitely an indie game, but the level of polish is noticeably higher. Instead of featuring completely disparate levels like Momodora 3, Momodora 4 features seamless transitions between levels, all of which are interconnected in a series of circuitous passageways. Momodora 2 had the same kind of exploration, but nowhere near the level of different environments. After taking care of some games I grabbed in a Steam sale, I resumed my journey through the Mega Man Legacy Collection. I think when I played Mega Man 2 back in 2008, I must have played normal mode because man, I was completely taken aback by just how annoying difficult mode is despite just playing the fiendishly difficult Mega Man 1. The Robot Masters are reasonable, but the Dr. Wily stages absolutely kicked my butt. I spent all day trying to finish this game. Honestly, it's probably not one of my more preferred games in the series despite the accolades it receives. I found Mega Man 1 a little more memorable. Mega Man 3 finally introduces the ability to slide, which significantly increases the interactivity in Robot Master encounters. This is nice, but the selection of weaponry takes a dive from MM2, which, in my opinion, didn't really have the best selection in the first place. Top Man's spin attack is terrible, and only ever worth using to exploit a weakness, for example. The only weapon I found myself using with any regularity was Shadow Blade, but even it was a strict downgrade of Metal Man's power from Mega Man 2. Although most would cite Mega Man 2 as the quintessential Mega Man title, I would say that honor belongs to Mega Man 4. It features the sliding mechanic and the first instance of the ability for Mega Man to charge his blaster. In addition, most of the Robot Master powers are pretty useful, although the obligatory shield power is as boring and useless as ever. Mega Man 5 is another solid entry in the series and introduces the ability to charge your blaster to a second level. It also features a pretty solid lineup of Robot Master powers, my favorite of which is Gyro Cutter, a fan blade that can be redirected mid-flight. It's also the first Mega Man entry to include Robotic Bird Beat, which wreaks havoc on your foes for a marginal energy cost. Mega Man 6 is the last of the classic series for NES, and reportedly it was pretty rushed. Even so, there's definitely plenty to enjoy here. It's probably the easiest of all 6 titles, but the new Rush adapter forms are pretty cool. The power form allows you to break blocks, and Mega Man even gains the ability to fuse with the Rush Jet to zip around like Iron Man. I definitely still enjoyed it. I finished 11 titles in December, which definitely seems like more than I've ever done before. I think I generally feel lucky to get 4 since I play so many RPGs, but a perfect storm of indies and Mega Man games combined to shatter my previous 35 game record. It's going to be hard to beat for next year. I'm running out of Mega Man games. There are many games I would like to play in 2017. I want to play Mega Man ZX and the Azure Striker Gunvolt series. I want to continue the East series. I'd like to pick back up on Dragon Quest. I stopped at 4 for some reason. And I'll certainly be picking up titles like the Final Fantasy XII Remaster, Persona 5, Neo, and Horizon Zero Dawn. Also, I'll finally play Pokemon Moon. I've owned it since the day it came out.